He laughed while signing the divorce papers, certain she had nothing. To him, Amara was just a shadow, the wife who sacrificed her dreams to build his empire, only to be mocked, betrayed, and replaced. He told friends she was just a phase. He told his mistress she was only a cousin. But what Kofi never knew was that Amara had been building in silence. And when the judge revealed her secret empire worth millions, his smug smile disappeared. This is the story of how betrayal lit a fire, and how the quiet wife became the storm no one saw coming. Before we continue, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. Now let's dive in. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper. The air was heavy, thick, with a silence that pressed on Amara's chest like a weight. She sat at the long wooden table, her hands clasped tightly together. From a distance, anyone might have thought she was trembling with fear, but it wasn't fear that made her fingers shake. It was the sharp finality of what was about to happen. Across from her sat Kofi, leaning back in his chair as though this wasn't a courtroom at all but a lounge where he owned the air. He wore an expensive navy suit, the kind that fit perfectly and shouted money. A golden watch gleamed on his wrist, catching the light every time he moved his arm. His lawyer whispered something into his ear and Kofi chuckled, his voice breaking the tense silence in the room. He picked up the pen lying in front of him, twirling it between his fingers with the same arrogance he had carried through their marriage. Then with a mocking little smirk he tapped it twice on the papers. "Finally," he said loud enough for Amara to hear. "Finally I'm free from this dead weight." His words sliced through her like glass, but Amara did not flinch. She kept her eyes down, her lips pressed together, her silence stronger than any reply she could have given. Kofi leaned back in his chair, still grinning, and signed his name with a flourish. He even chuckled as though he had just finished a deal he knew he had won. The courtroom was so quiet that even the scratching of the pen on paper seemed loud. Amara lifted her eyes just for a second, meeting his, and saw the gleam of triumph in them. It wasn't the look of a man ending a marriage with regret. It was the look of someone who thought he had destroyed his opponent. The judge, an older man with glasses perched low on his nose, cleared his throat. His voice was calm but steady as he said, "Before we finalize these proceedings, there is one last matter to review. Financial disclosures from both parties." The words hung in the air. Kofi's smile flickered just for the briefest second. He leaned toward his lawyer, whispering, "She doesn't have anything. Just wave it off." But Amara sat still, her hands resting lightly on the table. Her breathing was even. She looked like someone who had already cried all the tears there were to cry and had nothing left to give but silence. The judge's eyes flicked between the two of them, and for a heartbeat, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Amara kept hers steady. She would not break here, not in front of him, not in front of anyone. Long before the silence of that courtroom, there had been laughter, warmth, and belief. Amara was only 22 when she met Kofi. She was bright-eyed, full of hope, her heart overflowing with the kind of love that believed in forever. She dreamed of starting her own fashion brand, sketching designs late into the night, her notebooks filled with colors and shapes that danced with possibility. But when she met Kofi, all her dreams seemed to shift. Kofi was charismatic, always talking about the future he wanted. He had plans, big ones. He wanted to start a tech company, something he believed would change lives. His eyes sparkled with ambition when he spoke, and Amara found herself drawn to that fire. They would sit together in a small cafe near the university, the air filled with the smell of roasted coffee beans, their fingers intertwined as they whispered about the life they would build. "I know it's not going to be easy," Kofi had said one evening, stirring his cup absent-mindedly. "But I can feel it, Amara. This company is going to be huge one day. I just need time. I just need someone who believes in me." Amara had smiled softly, placing her hand over his. "I believe in you, Kofi. I'll always believe in you." And she meant it. With every fiber of her being she meant it. She was 22. She thought love meant sacrifice. She thought love meant putting someone else first so they could rise, because if they rose, both of them would rise together. So when money was short, she didn't complain. She worked long hours at the bank, dragging her tired body home after 12-hour shifts, only to cook dinner and clean their tiny apartment. She did it with quiet joy, believing it was all part of building their dream. When they couldn't pay rent one month, she opened the small jewelry box her mother had given her and quietly sold her favorite pieces. The gold bangles, the necklace she had worn on her graduation day, all gone to keep them afloat. Kofi had hugged her when she told him. "You're amazing, Amara," he had whispered into her hair. "I don't know what I'd do without you." She had smiled through the ache in her chest. That's what love is, she thought. That's what being a partner means. There were nights when he would slump into their worn-out couch, frustrated because investors had turned him down again. Amara would sit beside him, holding his hand, whispering encouragements. "Don't give up," she would say softly. "One day they'll see what I see in you. One day you'll make it." He would look at her then, his eyes full of gratitude, and she felt her heart swell with pride. To her there was no greater joy than helping him climb, helping him build a future. Her own dream, the fashion sketches that once filled her notebooks, grew dusty in a corner drawer. She told herself it was fine. She could wait. Kofi's dream was more important right now. If he rises, we rise together. That was the mantra she repeated to herself every time exhaustion gnawed at her, every time doubt whispered in her ear. And so she carried him on her shoulders, believing that one day when his dreams came true, they would both stand tall, hand in hand as equals. What she didn't know was that as she lifted him higher, Kofi was slowly forgetting the hands that had carried him. Success came quickly, just as Kofi had promised in those nights when their fridge was almost empty. One day he was hunched over his laptop in their dim apartment, coding endlessly. The next his app was making headlines. Investors called. Journalists wanted interviews. Big companies knocked on his door asking for partnerships. Money started to pour in. First it was a car, sleek, black, and expensive. Then it was a house with glass walls so big Amara sometimes felt like she was wandering inside a museum. The rooms echoed, too wide and too empty, and the silence in them reminded her of something missing. Kofi thrived in the spotlight. The man who once spoke softly about dreams now strutted across stages at conferences, his voice booming with confidence. His face appeared on TV screens, his quotes shared on social media. Everyone called him a genius, a visionary. And Amara? She faded into the background. At first she thought it was just the busyness of success, the weight of responsibility. She excused the way he walked a few steps ahead of her in public, no longer holding her hand. She forgave the way he stopped introducing her as his wife, instead saying vaguely, "This is Amara. She helps around." One evening at a crowded launch party, Amara stood by his side in a simple black dress she had stitched herself years ago. People surrounded Kofi, clinking glasses of champagne, their laughter rising above the music. "Man, you've really made it," one of his friends said, slapping him on the back. "And who's this lovely lady?" Kofi didn't even glance at her. "Oh, that's just Amara," he said quickly. "She helps with things." The group nodded politely, already turning their attention back to him. Amara felt her heart sink into her stomach. She wanted to scream, "I am his wife. I am the one who stayed when he had nothing." But the words caught in her throat, strangled by the humiliation. Later that night she sat quietly in the car as he drove them home, his laughter still echoing from the party. He didn't notice her silence. He didn't notice how her hands were clenched tightly on her lap. The distance between them grew, invisible but suffocating. At parties, she became the woman who carried trays of drinks, smiled politely, and melted into the background while Kofi basked in attention. People didn't know she was the one who had worked extra shifts to pay for his first laptop. They didn't know she was the one who had sold her jewelry to keep the lights on. She became invisible. And then came the night that cut her deeper than all the others. They were at a private dinner with some of his closest friends. Amara moved quietly around the table, setting down plates, when she heard Kofi laugh loudly. "Amara," he said, glancing at her before turning back to his friends. "She was just a phase. Something temporary." The table erupted in laughter. Wine glasses clinked. No one noticed the way her face went pale, the way her hands trembled as she held the tray. She stood frozen, her heart breaking silently inside her chest. She wanted to drop everything and scream, "A phase? I gave you everything. I gave you my youth, my dreams, my life." But she didn't. She stayed quiet. No one saw her pain. No one cared to look. That night, as Kofi laughed louder with his friends, Amara stood in the corner like a shadow. But inside something shifted. Beneath the sharp ache of humiliation, a quiet fire flickered to life. She realized she was invisible to him, and that invisibility was no longer weakness. It was her shield. He would not see her coming when she finally rose again. The night that changed everything began like many others. Kofi came home late, his cologne mixed with the faint smell of whiskey. Amara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to his footsteps. She told herself not to care, not to ask where he had been. Questions were useless now. He didn't come into the bedroom. Instead, he walked straight into the living room, his voice low at first, then louder as he spoke on the phone. Amara tried to ignore it, but something in his tone caught her attention. She sat up, slipped quietly out of bed and stood in the hallway, her heart pounding. Yes, yes, Kofi was saying, laughter in his voice. Amara? Please. She's sweet, but I deserve better now. Someone who matches my level, you know? She's just not it anymore. The words hit her like a blow to the stomach. Her body froze. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart didn't shatter loudly. It cracked in silence, the kind of pain that steals all sound from the world. She waited for tears, for anger, for the urge to confront him, but none came. Instead, she felt herself turning to stone. Slowly, she walked away from the hallway, her bare feet making no sound against the floor. She entered the small spare room at the back of the house, the one she had once called her creative corner. It had been 6 years since she last touched the dusty laptop sitting on the desk. 6 years since she closed her sketchbooks, hiding them like secrets. 6 years since she had given up her dream for his. Her hands trembled as she opened the laptop. The screen flickered to life, sluggish after years of sleep. She searched through old folders until her eyes landed on one, Dream Designs by Amara. She clicked it open. Sketches filled the screen. Bright colors. Bold shapes. Designs she had once poured her soul into. They stared back at her, untouched, waiting for her return. A smile tugged at her lips, not a smile of joy but one of quiet power. For the first time in years she felt herself breathing again. This was her. This was who she had been before she allowed herself to disappear into Kofi's shadow. She traced her fingers across the designs on the screen, whispering to herself, "You're still here. You never left me." That night she made a silent promise. She would no longer waste her energy trying to prove her worth to a man who couldn't see it. She would no longer live invisible, shrinking to fit inside his success. She didn't storm into the living room. She didn't shout at Kofi. She didn't tell him she had overheard. She simply sat in front of the laptop until dawn, sketching, rediscovering the fire that had once burned inside her. And though Kofi laughed on the phone, convinced she was asleep, convinced she was still his silent shadow, Amara was already waking up. This time she would not disappear. This time her silence would not be weakness. It would be the silence of focus. The silence of power. The silence before a storm. By day, Amara lived the life everyone expected of her. Quiet, patient, invisible. She woke up early, cooked Kofi's breakfast, straightened his ties, and watched him walk out the door with the same smug grin he always wore now that the world adored him. But by night, when the house sank into silence and Kofi snored on the other side of their too-big bed, Amara transformed. She would slip out quietly, pad into the small spare room at the back of the house and sit at her desk. The glow of her laptop bathed her face. The silence filled with the scratch of pencils and the clicking of keys. The first sketches were hesitant, shaky lines as she relearned what it felt like to dream again. But soon the old rhythm returned. Her hands flew across the paper, bold colors swirling, shapes forming, outfits coming alive. She wasn't just drawing anymore. She was breathing again. One night, staring at her designs, she whispered, "It's time." That same night, she created an online account under a new name, AKO Studio. Not Amara, not Mrs. Kofi, not anyone's shadow, just a bold, faceless brand. Her heart raced as she uploaded her first collection, designs inspired by African tradition but reimagined with modern edges. She priced them modestly, telling herself it didn't matter if no one bought them. He just needed to try. Days later, while Kofi was boasting on his podcast about being self-made, Amara checked her email. New order, 1 item purchased. Her breath caught. Someone had bought her design. A stranger. A customer. A believer. She pressed her hands to her mouth to hold back a sob. It wasn't just about the money. It was the validation. Her voice wasn't gone. People could still see her even if Kofi refused to. More orders trickled in. Then dozens. Then hundreds. Her nights became longer. He watched tutorials on branding and marketing. She studied fabrics, suppliers, customer feedback. She worked until dawn sometimes, closing her laptop just before Kofi's alarm rang. "Why do you look so tired?" Kofi asked one morning, pouring coffee. Amara smiled faintly. "Just restless nights." He didn't press further. He never did. To him she was background noise. And that invisibility became her armor. He never once asked what she was working on. Meanwhile, his podcast grew more popular. Ironically, he often mocked women entrepreneurs. "These so-called female founders," he laughed with one guest, "most of them are just playing dress-up. They're not serious about business." Amara sat on the other side of the room, phone in hand, pretending to scroll social media. She didn't look at him, but inside her chest tightened. Still, she whispered to herself, "Keep going." Every insult became fuel. Every laugh of his pushed her further. 18 months passed this way. By day, the silent wife. By night, the storm gathering. And while Kofi paraded around as the genius visionary, Amara, unseen, underestimated, was quietly building an empire. It was a bright afternoon when Amara decided, for the first time in years, to surprise her husband. She remembered how, back in their early days, she used to pack little lunches for him. Simple meals wrapped with love. He had always smiled then, always kissed her cheek with gratitude. She thought maybe, just maybe, doing it again would remind them of something they had lost. So she cooked his favorite dish, carefully packed it in a bag and took a cab to his office. The building was tall, sleek glass gleaming in the sun. As Amara walked in, she felt strangely out of place among the polished floors and well-dressed employees. But she held onto the bag tightly, her heart hoping. She reached the receptionist's desk. "Is Kofi in?" she asked with a small smile. The woman behind the desk, slim, stylish, younger than her, looked up. Amara recognized her. She had seen her once or twice at events, always hovering near Kofi. The woman's eyes flicked to the lunch bag in Amara's hands. Then she smirked, leaning back in her chair. "You're the wife?" she asked, her voice dripping with amusement. Amara blinked, startled. "Yes, I'm his wife." The woman chuckled and placed a hand on her stomach, the swell of her baby bump unmistakable now. "Wow. He told me you were just his sick cousin." The words slammed into Amara like a physical blow. She stood frozen, gripping the bag so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her mind raced, her heart pounding, but her face remained calm. The secretary tilted her head. "Guess he didn't tell you about me." Amara's throat tightened, but she didn't give the woman the satisfaction of a reaction. She simply nodded once, placed the bag gently on the desk and turned away. Each step toward the door felt heavier than the last, but her back remained straight, her chin high. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. By the time she stepped outside into the afternoon sun, something inside her had broken. Not her heart, but the shell she had kept around it. Her hand shook slightly as she pulled out her phone and dialed a number. When her lawyer answered, she didn't falter. "It's time," she said, her voice calm, steady. That moment wasn't her ending. It was the beginning of her finally choosing herself. The gossip had already spread before the divorce papers were even signed. Kofi, with his loud laugh and expensive suits, walked into every room like a man who had already won. He told his friends, his colleagues, even strangers, that Amara would soon be crawling back to him for money. "She can't survive without me," he boasted one night over drinks. "She's always been dependent. Watch, she'll ask for alimony and I'll say no. I'll teach her a lesson." His friends laughed, raising their glasses. Meanwhile, Amara stayed silent. She didn't reply to rumors. She didn't argue when people pitted her. She simply moved quietly as she always had. The day of the first hearing arrived. Kofi strutted into the courtroom, sunglasses on, the golden watch glittering on his wrist. His suit was crisp, his cologne sharp. He carried himself like a man arriving at a photo shoot, not a divorce proceeding. He leaned down to whisper to his lawyer, loud enough for Amara to hear. "Just get it done. She has nothing." Amara sat on the opposite side, her hair neatly tied back, her clothes simple. She didn't wear makeup, didn't wear anything flashy. But in her eyes, there was a calm strength that no one could ignore. The judge entered, shuffling through the paperwork. "We are here today for the divorce between Mr. Kofi Mensah and Mrs. Amara Mensah. Have the terms been reviewed?" Kofi's lawyer stood confidently. "Yes, Your Honor. We are ready. There are no financial claims from Mrs. Mensah. My client believes she has no assets to declare. Kofi smirked, leaning back, one arm draped lazily over the chair. He looked at Amara like a man watching an opponent crumble. But Amara remained still. The judge glanced at her. Mrs. Mensah, do you have any assets or claims to declare before we finalize? For a moment, silence filled the room. Everyone expected her to shake her head, to confirm what Kofi had been saying all along, that she was leaving with nothing. But instead Amara reached into her bag. Her movements were slow, deliberate. She pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table. Her lawyer picked it up and handed it to the judge. What is this? Kofi muttered, his brow furrowing. The judge adjusted his glasses, flipping through the documents. His eyes narrowed as he read. Then he cleared his throat. These are financial statements, investment documents, and proof of ownership. Mrs. Mensah, are you the registered owner of AKO Studio? The room stirred. Lawyers glanced at each other, confused. Amara sat tall, her voice calm but firm. Yes, Your Honor. AKO Studio is mine. Kofi blinked, his smirk faltering. AO Studio? He whispered, the name tickling something in his memory. He had heard it before. In passing, in magazines, in conversations about a rising fashion brand shaking the industry. His lawyer leaned in. It's a fashion company. A big one. Kofi's chest tightened. He sat forward now, his sunglasses forgotten. Wait, what? The judge continued reading, his voice echoing through the courtroom. AKO Studio has reported revenue in the millions. There are signed contracts with international brands, expansion into other countries, and a recent valuation of $18 million. Gasps rippled through the room. Kofi's mouth went dry. He turned to stare at Amara, who sat there calmly, her face serene. No pride, no arrogance, just truth. Amara, he whispered, his voice cracking. AKO Studio is yours? She turned her head slowly, meeting his eyes for the first time in years. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, soft but unshakable. It always was, she said quietly. You just never asked. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Everyone leaned forward, eyes darting between Amara and Kofi. The judge continued listing the numbers, reading aloud the empire Amara had built in secret. Investors lining up, international collaborations, brand deals that had placed AKO Studio on the global map. Each word was a hammer striking down Kofi's arrogance. His smirk had vanished completely. His palms grew sweaty, his heartbeat erratic. He looked at Amara like she was a stranger. This can't be true, he muttered. You were always at home. You had nothing. Amara's eyes held his, steady and unflinching. I had myself. The judge finished reading and placed the file down. It seems Mrs. Mensah has no need for alimony or spousal support. She is financially independent, with considerable assets of her own. Kofi slumped back in his chair, stunned. Around them, whispers filled the room. Even the lawyers looked impressed. The woman everyone thought was powerless, silent, invisible, had been building an empire right under his nose. Kofi leaned closer to her, desperation creeping into his voice. Amara, why didn't you tell me? We could have. She cut him off with a soft shake of her head. No, Kofi. There is no we anymore. You never saw me. You never believed I could be more than what you made me. And that was your mistake. Her words were not shouted. They were not angry. They were calm, but they carried the weight of thunder. The judge cleared his throat. Shall we proceed with finalizing the divorce? Amara nodded. Her voice was steady as she said, Yes, Your Honor. Kofi's eyes were wide, pleading now. Amara, wait. You don't understand. But she didn't look at him again. She kept her gaze forward, her hands folded neatly on the table. For her, this wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about standing in her truth. And in that moment, the storm she had carried inside her for years finally broke. Not with anger, but with quiet power that silenced the entire room. When the judge signed the final papers, Amara stood gracefully. She gathered her things and walked out of the courtroom without looking back. Kofi sat frozen, his empire still intact, his wealth still his. But something priceless had slipped through his fingers. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost the woman who had believed in him more than he believed in himself. He had lost the one person who had carried him when he had nothing. And now, in front of everyone, he had to face the bitter truth. The woman he thought was nothing had become everything. The courtroom still echoed in Amara's ears long after she stepped outside. The sky was a soft shade of gray, clouds heavy with unshed rain, but to her, it felt brighter than it had in years. For the first time she was walking freely, not just away from a man but away from the weight of being unseen. Her lawyer caught up with her on the steps. "Mrs. Mensah," he began, his tone respectful, "with your company's worth you could claim a great deal. The house, the cars, the investments you both shared, they're legally yours to fight for." Amara paused, her hand resting on the iron railing. She thought of the house, its walls echoing with silence, the memories of nights spent waiting for Kofi to come home, the humiliation she had endured under that roof. She thought of the sleek cars he paraded through the city, symbols of vanity more than value. Slowly she shook her head. "I don't want them. They belong to the man he pretended to be, not the woman I've become." Her lawyer blinked. "Are you sure? You could ruin him." Amara's lips curved into a soft smile, not bitter, not triumphant, just calm. "I don't need to ruin him. I've already outgrown him." Those words carried more power than any revenge could have. That night, Amara returned to the house one last time to pack her belongings. The rooms felt colder than usual, emptier, as though they were already mourning her absence. She walked slowly, touching the edges of furniture, not with longing but with closure. Kofi was there, sitting on the edge of their bed, his face pale. He didn't look like the arrogant man who had strutted into the courtroom hours earlier. His hands fidgeted in his lap, his eyes hollow. "Amara," he said quietly as she entered, his voice stripped of all confidence. "We don't have to end it like this. You don't have to go." She folded her clothes neatly into a suitcase, her back to him. "It ended long before today, Kofi. You just never noticed." He stood, his desperation seeping through. "I made mistakes, but we can fix this. You don't need to walk away with nothing. Take the house. Take the cars. Just don't leave me like this." Amara turned to face him, her eyes steady. "I'm not walking away with nothing. I'm walking away with everything that matters. My dignity, my peace, and my own name." Tears brimmed in his eyes. "You're really going to leave me with nothing?" She shook her head. "No, Kofi. I'm leaving you with everything you thought mattered. I'm taking only what truly belongs to me." Her words left him silent. She zipped her suitcase, lifted it, and walked past him. As she reached the doorway, she paused, her voice low but sharp. "You'll realize one day, Kofi, that losing me wasn't about losing a wife. It was about losing the one person who believed in you when no one else did. And that's something you'll never replace." She didn't wait for his reply. When the door closed behind her, it didn't slam. It clicked softly like the quiet end of a song. Final, certain. Amara rented a small apartment at first, modest but filled with light. She decorated it with her own sketches, fabrics, and plants by the windowsill. It wasn't extravagant, but every corner felt like hers. For the first time in years, she slept peacefully. Meanwhile, AKO's studio continued to grow. Orders flooded in, investors lined up, and international magazines praised the brand's unique blend of tradition and modernity. Her name spread, not as Kofi's wife, but as Amara, the founder of AKO Studio. And she didn't just carry success. She carried peace, the kind that can't be bought, the kind that comes only when you stop trying to prove your worth to someone blind to it. 6 months later, Kofi sat in a waiting room, tapping his fingers impatiently on the armrest. He was waiting for a meeting with potential investors, but they were late. On the table in front of him lay a stack of glossy magazines. He grabbed one without thinking, flipping through casually. And then he froze. On the cover was a woman in vibrant African fashion, her head held high, her eyes calm and confident. The headline blazed across the page. "Africa's Silent Storm. Meet Amara, the woman behind AKO Studio's global rise." Kofi's throat tightened. His eyes scanned the article. How she had built the empire quietly, how AKO Studio was now featured in international fashion weeks, how her designs were celebrated for their originality and soul. He felt the world tilt under him. The woman he had mocked, ignored, dismissed, she was not just surviving without him. She was shining brighter than he had ever imagined. He whispered her name, almost a prayer. "Amara." But she wasn't there. Across the continent, Amara stood in a hotel suite overlooking a city skyline. She had just finished speaking at a women's leadership event, her words inspiring thousands. Her assistant walked in holding the same magazine with a grin. "You've seen the cover, right?" Amara chuckled softly, her fingers tracing the edge of her suitcase as she zipped it. "Yes. I've seen it." She picked up her passport, ready to fly to Paris for a fashion showcase. As she glanced out the window at the bustling city below, she whispered to herself, "They thought I was quiet. I was just focused." Her reflection stared back at her in the glass. Not the shadow of someone else, not the invisible wife of a successful man, but a woman who had risen from silence into a storm that no one could ignore. The world now knew her name. Not as Kofi's wife. Not as someone's shadow. But as Amara. The woman who built an empire with her own hands, who chose peace over revenge, and who finally stood in her own light. And somewhere, miles away, Kofi sat with the magazine in his hands, realizing too late that the woman he thought was nothing had become everything. So, what do you think? Did Amara win by walking away in silence, or should she have taken everything from him? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories where betrayal turns into triumph, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you never miss the next one.